Welcome to Filmscore Fantastic, the podcast that takes you on a magical, thrilling, and sometimes emotional journey through the world of film, television, video game, and theme park music, presented to you by the Knittel Imaginarium. I am your host, Chris Knittel, and I am excited to be back to relaunch the series. We have a bunch of exciting shows to share with you in the near future. For our return, we want to go all the way back to the beginning. For today's show, we want to take you on a historical journey of the film score. Answer questions like, what is a film score? What are the origins of the film score? What is the process of creating a film score? And along the way, we'll have some fun surprises. So if you're ready, buckle up those safety restraints. Keep all hands, arms, and legs inside of our vehicle as we start our journey into the film score. Welcome back. Hopefully you heard something that you liked in part 1. So happy that you are back with us. We left off part 1 at the closing of what is commonly referred to as the golden age of film scoring, which lasted until the very early 1950s. Now, the end to the golden age by no means resulted in scores being any less fantastic, and a lot of classic scores were still being written by the early masters. It simply meant the end of film music being almost 100% scored in the Romantic classic period, and the introduction and stretching of the kind of music we begin to hear. There are still plenty of golden age type scores being written, but filmmakers and audiences move into diverging directions musically. Let's pick up where we left off. The 1950s saw music branch out to include different styles of music like jazz. We also see original songs being composed for the films. Now, these are songs that were typically written by the composers themselves, but these songs were written specifically for the films that they appear in. The new sounds and different musical styles begin early into the next decade. In 1951, A Streetcar Named Desire features a hybrid symphonic jazz score by composer Alex North. This is a major step forward for film music, moving Hollywood film scoring away from exclusively European sound. Although it's Elmer Bernstein's The Man with the Golden Arm from 1955 that is widely considered to be the groundbreaking soundtrack in terms of jazz in modern cinema, it was North's score 4 years earlier that actually got the ball rolling. The New Orleans location sets off the jazz flavor that infuses the sultry, decadent atmosphere of A Streetcar Named Desire. North understood these early jazz and blues elements and how to make them work within an orchestral music texture. The result goes way beyond just reflecting the New Orleans setting. The score captured the slinky eroticism of jazz of that period and of the film itself. Now, Alex North's background was as much about jazz as it was classical. As a young man in the 1930s, having studied first at Juilliard, North traveled to his family's native Russia to study music at a Moscow conservatory. But he was drawn back to America again, largely because of his love for jazz. On his return, he studied with Aaron Copland. Benny Goodman commissioned him to write a concerto for clarinet and orchestra, in which he was said to have tried to simulate jazz in a classical structure. He started to write incidental music for theater, and this is how he first met Elian Kazan, joining forces initially for a stage play of Death of a Salesman. Let's listen to the first track from this groundbreaking score. Here is Streetcar from the original soundtrack score from the 1951 film A Streetcar Named Desire, composed by Alex North, conducted by Ray Heindorf. North's orchestral coloring on this score was an inspiration for later film composers such as Jerry Goldsmith and Quincy Jones. In 1952, High Noon features the original song Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, composed by Dimitri Tiomkin, sung by Tex Ritter, which proves instrumental in the commercial promotion of the film. The song has been praised for its musical integration with the rest of the score, as well as lyrically matching the themes of honor and obligation, which typically drive this stunning allegorical Western. The original song was awarded the 1952 Academy Award for Best Original Song and was performed that night for the Academy by Ritter. There were only 3 instruments accompanying Ritter on the soundtrack: guitar, accordion, and the Hammond Novachord, the first electric synthesizer, which created an unusual gourd-like percussion background. Following the success of Oh My Darling, studios began asking composers to write original songs for their films, both for promotional purposes via radio play and later on for ancillary revenue in the form of soundtrack album sales. Let's give a listen to this groundbreaking original song. Here is Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling, from the 1952 film High Noon, composed by Dimitri Tiomkin, sung by Tex Ritter.
Do not forsake me, oh my darling, on this our wedding day. Do not forsake me, oh my darling, wait long. The noonday train will bring Frank Miller. If I'm a man, I must be brave, and I must face that deadly killer. Or I a coward, a craven coward, or lie a coward in my grave. Oh, to be torn twixt love and duty, supposing I lose my fair half beauty. Look at that big hand move along here in high noon. He made a vow while in state's prison, vowed it would be my life or his, and I'm not afraid of death, but oh, what will I do if you leave me?
And there you have it, an original song specifically composed for a major motion picture film. Moving into 1954, the studio system begins to dissolve. Composers transition from being employed by the studio to being freelance creatives. But unlike other conductors and instrumentalists, film composers do not belong to the American Federation of Musicians, a fact that will have long-term consequences. 1958 sees Miles Davis's contribution to the French noir film Elevator to the Gallows notable for a few reasons. Gallows is a jazz score in its purest form, having been scored with a trio of musicians improvising to the screen. Whether or not you've seen the film, you very likely associate jazz or the trumpet with film noir, and this film is a big reason why. Miles Davis's work on Gallows makes him one of the earliest African-American film composers, paving the way for later artists like Quincy Jones, Herbie Hancock, and Terence Blanchard to follow in his footsteps. Let's give a listen to the main titles from the film Elevator to the Gallows from 1958, composed and performed by Miles Davis. Leaving the 1950s behind, the 1960s saw more jazz, pop, and of course, the Western. In 1960, distinguished film composer Elmer Bernstein wrote the driving score for The Magnificent Seven, John Sturges's 1960 remake of Akira Kurosawa's classic The Seven Samurai. Conjuring vistas of dusty plains and big skies, the galloping main theme surely rates as one of the most stirring and recognizable themes ever composed. Although it lost out to Ernst Gold's Exodus in the Best Score category at the 1961 Academy Awards, Bernstein's soundtrack was ranked by the American Film Institute the 8th greatest American film score of all time on the list of AFI's 100 Years of Film Scores. Exodus does not make the top 25. Elmer Bernstein tells us if you look at the movie without music, you'd be surprised how slow-moving it is. I realized immediately that the function of the music would be to get on top of the film, drive it along. It had to have tremendous life and vigor. This contrasting of sound and picture was a technique he'd taken from working with renowned filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille on the Ten Commandments in 1956. Bernstein's road to working with the likes of DeMille and John Sturges was an unusual one. He'd begun a career as a concert pianist in New York from the age of 15, while studying under Aaron Copland and later Stefan Volpe. By his 20s, he'd become involved with the burgeoning American folk scene, which at the time was populated with strongly left-leaning musicians, among whom Bernstein counted himself, like Woody Guthrie and ethnomusicologists such as Alan Lomax, for whom folk music was a means to preserving working-class cultures and raising class consciousness. When the Second World War came around, the U.S. military decided that folk music could be used to instill patriotism among the troops, and Bernstein was drafted by the Army Air Corps to arrange songs for propaganda radio shows. After the war, and a brief return to concertizing, Bernstein scored a radio show written by a friend to celebrate the achievement of peace in Israel. This score was picked up by the magazine Variety and reviewed positively, leading the film work in Hollywood. By the time The Magnificent Seven came around, Bernstein had composed high-profile soundtracks to, as we mentioned earlier, The Ten Commandments and The Man with the Golden Arm. He also narrowly avoided a career-ending incident when he was gray-listed by McCarthy's government at the height of the Red Scare, something which he later described as a point of pride. But aside from his successes as a film composer, before and since, among the most intriguing aspects of the story of the Magnificent Seven's themes are in the ways in which it has continued to exist beyond the movie. The year after the film's release, the jazz guitarist Al Caiola released an orchestra-backed cover of the song, and in the same year, the composer of the iconic James Bond score, John Barry, released his own cover, inspired by surf rock. It later resurfaced in the intro to Arthur Conley's 1967 song, Sweet Soul Music, but perhaps its most iconic reinvention came with the long-standing Marlboro Man campaign, which ran from 1963 to 1971. In an article by Denver Post journalist Jim Carrier, who spent 6 months traveling across the American West to meet former Marlboro men, we're told that the campaign began in late 1954 when ad executive Leo Burnett asked his top creatives, what is the most masculine image in the United States today? According to Carrier, Philip Morris, the fourth largest American tobacco company, wanted to create a filter cigarette to deal with the rising problem of smoker's cough and lung disease, but they had to overcome the early image of filters as for being for sissies. He tells us that in 1963, almost by accident, Leo Burnett's film crew discovered the magic of real cowboys on the 4-6's ranch in Guthrie, Texas. With the theme from The Magnificent Seven in the background, ad scenes of real cowboys riding the range made Marlboro the best-selling cigarette in the world, and Philip Morris the largest manufacturer, with cash flow to gobble up Kraft Foods and Miller Beer. Over 8 years, Marlboro ran a series of TV ads backed by variations on Bernstein's theme until they were relegated to billboards by a broadcast ban on tobacco products. This transformation from movie soundtrack to sonic signature conjuring visions of the expansive West and a romanticized, rugged American masculinity, and selling billions of cigarettes in the process, speaks volumes about the power of a well-crafted bond between music and film, as well as the dangers of what we now see more clearly as irresponsible advertising. Let's give this historic score a listen with a 6-minute suite from the film The Magnificent Seven from 1960, composed by Elmer Bernstein. What a fantastic 6 minutes of music. Staying with the Western, Ennio Morricone's work on Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy from 1964 to 1966 are groundbreaking among the now classic Western scores of the decade. The final film in this trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, features what is probably the most instantly recognizable and famous of Morricone's themes. But there is much more to admire in this score, such as the inventive motifs, formation of thematic material, and adroit orchestrations, which the maestro considered possibly even more important than the act of composition. The composer created his own genre and utilized the recording studio as an instrument in achieving his vision by layering trumpets and varying echo to create a sense of depth. This score is a kaleidoscope of nature call and response symbols, agonized shouts, a grunting male chorus, epic wordless female voice, haunting harmonica, spiritual bugling trumpets, tolling chimes, vivid surf rock Fender guitar, and sounds imitating gunfire. It is stylized, yet cinematic. It is avant-garde, yet embraces traditional film scoring, with some cues scored reverently for trumpet, harmonica, strings, and chorus. Let's give this groundbreaking score a listen with a 10-minute suite from the 1966 film The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, composed by Ennio Morricone. Leaving the westerns behind, for now, jazz composers Henry Mancini and Lalo Schifrin, best known respectively for the Pink Panther film series that began in 1963 and CBS's Mission Impossible that ran from 1966 to 1973, do their best part to keep jazz relevant in film and television, while British composer John Barry almost single-handedly defines the sound of spy films with his symphonic jazz hybrid scoring of the popular James Bond film franchise. Now, jumping back to 1962, Maurice Jarre's lush score for Lawrence of Arabia creates the template for all future desert and Middle Eastern setting soundtracks by the fusing of exotic Middle Eastern scales with sweeping string melodies. Maurice Jarre, little known at the time and selected only after both William Walton and Malcolm Arnold had proved unavailable, Jarre was given just 6 weeks to compose 2 hours of orchestral music for Lawrence. The score was performed by the London Philharmonic Orchestra. Sir Adrian Boult is listed as the conductor of the score in the film's credits, but he could not conduct most of the score, due in part to his failure to adapt to the intricate timings of each cue, and Jarre replaced him as conductor. The score went on to garner Jarre his first Academy Award for music and is now considered one of the greatest scores of all time, ranking number 3 on the American Film Institute's top 25 film scores. Initially, producer Sam Spiegel wanted to create a score with 2 themes to show the Eastern and British side for the film. It was intended for Soviet composer Aram Khachaturian to create one half and British composer Benjamin Britten to write the other. While there are many examples of Jarre's influence on later films, a couple of the best examples is John Williams' score for the 1981 film Raiders of the Lost Ark and Jerry Goldsmith's score for 1999's The Mummy. Let's listen to a 10-minute suite from the 1962 film Lawrence of Arabia, composed by Maurice Jarre. An amazing score and definitely one of my favorites. Hopefully you as well can hear the influence on a lot of those films that we see today. Now, getting back on track, in 1967, the soundtrack to Mike Nichols' The Graduate is created almost entirely by licensing songs that had nothing to do with the film itself. The film's only original song, Simon and Garfunkel's Mrs. Robinson, is a #1 hit. This practice continues to influence Hollywood's approach to film music for decades. The ancillary income opportunity of soundtrack sales, in combination with the fact that it's cheaper, at least at the time, to score a film with songs, makes this method a highly attractive strategy for studios. I do want to note, though, that by 2017, it will no longer be cheaper to license pop songs over scoring with a traditional orchestra. The next year in 1968, Alex North's score for Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey is replaced by the director's temp track, comprised of classical pieces like Strauss's Also sprach Zarathustra. The soundtrack album is a huge commercial success and is also one of the earliest examples of what composers will refer to as temp love. Temp love is the phenomena of a director falling in love with the temporary soundtrack to which their film is edited, thereby making anything the composer might write unpalatable, regardless of how well it may serve the film. Also in 1968 is the highly experimental score for the film The Planet of the Apes, composed by Jerry Goldsmith. Now, director Franklin Schaffner bonded with composer Jerry Goldsmith during their first collaboration, The Stripper, in 1963. As such, he was the natural choice for the film. Goldsmith resolved early for his music to speak to the primal and inverted nature of the ape world, and so abandoned the use of traditional melodic constructs, instead drawing inspiration from modernist composers such as Bartók and Stravinsky. For this avant-garde effort, Goldsmith assembled a remarkable array of percussive, acoustic, ethnic, and non-traditional instruments, which included a xylophone, a vibroslap, a cuica, which is a Brazilian drumhead device with a rod inserted in the middle, used to create startling ape imitations, and stainless steel mixing bowls, which Goldsmith brought from his own kitchen. The only electronica used in the score was the Echoplex, which he used to create the echoing effects for his percussive and pizzicato strings. Additionally, he infused his score with string harmonics, employed various bowing techniques such as col legno battuto, which is essentially using the wood side of the bow. And his French horn players reverse their mouthpieces and blow air through their horns. Lastly, he assembled a huge assortment of drums, the most primitive of all the instruments, along with bells, water drop bars, a piano, boobams, an electric harp, an electric bass clarinet, a bass slide whistle, a shofar, and a 10-foot-long Tibetan horn. Goldsmith's soundscape for the film is surrealistic, abandons key, and offers stunning dissonance. He uses an array of ostinato techniques to create kinetic motifs which serve to unify the score. After all of that, you must be intrigued. Let's give this a listen with a suite from the score to the 1968 film Planet of the Apes, composed by Jerry Goldsmith. Quite a lot happened in film scoring in the 1950s and 60s that expanded the musical styles heard in the films of the day. And this was just an extremely brief look at some of the milestones during this time period. Join us next time for part 3 of the history of the film score as we move into the 1970s, 80s, and beyond. We'll see you soon.